Part 11. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 101. Business was slow on a rainy day, so Butcher Zhang closed his stall early. When he saw Tang Ning, he smiled honestly and said, "There's still half a kilogram of meat left today. It won't be fresh by tomorrow. I'll pass by later and I'll deliver it to the small shop like a girl." Tang Ning smiled, waved, and said, "Thanks." Uncle San would deliver 2 portions of breakfast every morning. Since then, the family has never been short of meat. Although Butcher Zheng suffered a loss in comparison, he obviously didn't care about it. After leaving the shop and walking on the street, the rain became heavier and heavier. Fang Xiaopang walked in front alone, with 2 of her guards following her. Tang Ning and Li Tianlan were a little further away from them. Because Fang Xiaopang would jump into a puddle when she encountered it. It rained so hard that her shoes and the hem of her clothes got wet, and then she became even more unscrupulous and fearless. Worried about being splashed with mud and water by her, Tang Ning and Li Tianlan had no choice but to stay far away. Tang Ning held up an umbrella and asked casually, "Can't Miss Li go home for the Chinese New Year this year?" When there is no one else around, he doesn't need to call Brother Li. Li Tianlan nodded and said, "During the Chinese New Year, we should be in the capital of Chen Kingdom." Tang Ning had been chatting with her a lot these days and knew that the envoys from Chu State came to Chen State this time not only to send tributes, but also to learn from Chen State's advanced cultural systems in all aspects. They will stay in the capital of Chen Kingdom long enough. Tang Ning didn't know if all Chu people were as studious and thirsty for knowledge as she was, but she thought that this was probably the reason why Chu could go from weak to strong in such a short period of time. He looked at the rain curtain around him, shook his head and said, "I don't know when this rain will end." Fang Xiaopang got bored of playing, so he ran over from the front again and said, "It's better if it rains. There's no need to go to school or recite poems on rainy days. By the way, when the rain stops, let's dig mushrooms to eat." Until now, Tang Ning had not figured out why Fang Xiaopang, who was born in a wealthy family and had no worries about food and clothing, was so obsessed with eating. Tang Ning was confused when 2 figures wearing raincoats passed by them. When they passed Tang Ning, their footsteps stopped. "Careful!" Li Tianlan's voice appeared in his ears almost instantly, and then he felt himself being pushed away violently. At the same time, the 2 figures in raincoats had already flown out. Under the curtain of rain, they had something in their hands. A cold light flashed by. Tang Ning almost fell down, but when she came back to her senses, she found that there were already numerous figures on the street wearing raincoats and covering their faces with cloaks, both in front and behind, forming a tendency to surround them. Fang Xiaopang's 2 guards had already reacted, pulled out their weapons, and stood beside Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked at them and said, "You guys leave quickly." The way in and out was blocked by people, so Tang Ning grabbed Fang Xiaopang and ran towards an alley beside her. He knew very well that if the 2 of them stayed here, they would only become a burden to Li Tianlan and the others. This alley was not a dead end. There was a path for one person to pass at the end of the alley. After passing that path, it was dozens of steps ahead. Which is Yong'an County government. Fang Xiaopang was also frightened. He was led by Tang Ning and ran towards the depths of the alley in a daze. The path at the end of the alley is the gap formed between 2 walls. Tang Ning pulled her and quickly ran to the end of the alley. She looked at Fang Xiaopang and said, "Hurry over." Fang Xiaopang tried to squeeze into the path, but was stuck in it, unable to move forward. I can't make it." Fang Xiaopang's face was pale, and he couldn't tell whether it was rain or tears in his eyes. Tang Ning's face was covered with rain, and her heart sank when she saw this scene. Fang Xinyu's 2 guards had been forced into the alley. They looked at the man in raincoat in front and said angrily, "Who are you?" Li Tianlan used the folded umbrella as a weapon and the umbrella as a sword. In a short period of time, Two men in raincoats fell to the ground. With the tip of her toes, she picked up a long knife from the ground and held it in her hand. The sword flashed, and another man in coir raincoat fell to the ground. Of the 8 men in coir raincoats, only 5 were left. 2 of them were fighting with Fang Xinyu's guards, and the other 3 formed an encirclement, surrounding Li Tianlan in the middle. Another sword light flashed in front of her, slashing at her knife-holding hand. Li Tianlan ignored it and pointed the blade directly at the chest of the man in the raincoat. The sound of 2 swords cutting through flesh. A blood stain appeared on Li Tianlan's arm, which was quickly diluted by the rain. The man in the coir raincoat was stabbed through the chest by a long knife. He held the long knife stuck in his chest tightly with both hands and fell to the ground. Li Tianlan saw the indifferent look in his eyes without any emotion through the cloak. Death warrior. She covered the wound on her right arm and took a few steps back. 2 other men in raincoats were already approaching her. She kicked one of them away, grabbed the knife from his hand with her other hand, and struck the other person. Click. The long knife in her hand broke in response, and a blood stain appeared again on her left arm. The hand of the man in the coir raincoat holding the knife was like a withered pine. Under the cloak, there was a pair of cloudy eyes, but unlike other men in the coir raincoat, they did not contain any emotion. Li Tianlan knew that he was no match for this person, so he quickly took a few steps back and came to Tang Ning's side. However, at the same time, he felt dizzy and his body staggered. Tang Ning picked up the broken knife she dropped on the ground, helped her to lean against the wall, stood up, and looked at the man in the raincoat. He asked hoarsely, "Who are you?" Through the cloak, he could not see the man's expression, but Tang Ning could feel that his eyes were fixed on him. "Really like?" The next moment, a more hoarse voice came from the cloak. Tang Ning paused for a moment before asking, "Resembling what?" "Resembling the lady." The man in the raincoat shook his head and said, "No need to delay, this time should be the last time." As soon as he finished speaking, he raised the long knife in his hand. "Miss Xiru is not at home, you can take the meat back yourself later." A voice came from behind the man in the raincoat, causing him to pause. Zheng the butcher stood behind him with Nanan in one hand, and Nanan helped him hold the umbrella. The man in the raincoat did not hesitate and chopped with the knife. Clang! The knife lighted up. Puff! Blood splashed everywhere. Nanan butcher Zheng looked down at the little girl. "Close your eyes." The little girl closed her eyes obediently. The knife in the straw raincoat man's hand had broken into 2 pieces, and the front half flew out, along with one of his arms. Butcher Zheng was holding a knife in his hand, a butcher knife. The tip of the knife was still dripping with blood. Tang Ning was a little dazed watching this scene. Butcher Zheng always had a butcher knife hanging on his waist, and he never left it. He was skilled in butchering pigs and chopping meat, just like he was skilled in chopping off the arm of the straw raincoat man. The straw raincoat man covered his broken arm, and a strong roar came out of his throat. He retreated quickly. Seeing this, the 2 straw raincoat men who were fighting with the 2 guards turned the knife without hesitation and pointed the tip of the knife at their chests. Puff! In the horrified eyes of the guards, the 2 men drew their knives and killed themselves. Li Tianlan had already fainted, his face was terribly pale. Tang Ning looked down and his face changed greatly. Butcher Zheng kicked the broken arm away and explained, "He was poisoned." Poisoned, Tang Ning was stunned for a moment, and immediately reached out to feel around in his arms. In order to be on the safe side, he always had a Dahuan on him. Although he didn't know if the Dahuan had the effect of detoxifying, this was the only thing he could do at this time. He pinched her mouth open and sent the Dahuan in. Her face was terribly pale. Tang Ning thought about it, tore open the clothes on her arms that were cut, and sucked out the poisonous blood near her wounds. After a while, Butcher Zheng glanced at him, "He should be fine, now it's your turn." Tang Ning looked down and found that her face had regained some redness. While she breathed a sigh of relief, she also found that she was a little dizzy and her eyes began to blacken. Li Tianlan's eyelashes trembled, and the moment she opened her eyes, her face showed extreme vigilance, and she subconsciously picked up the broken knife on the ground. Butcher Zheng looked at her and said, "It's okay." She looked at the situation around her, and felt relieved. She looked at Tang Ning who was lying beside her, and asked in surprise, "Is he injured?" Butcher Zheng shook his head and said, "He fed you the detoxification pill, helped you suck out the poisonous blood, and he was poisoned." Li Tianlan was stunned in place, and at this moment, she realized that something in her mouth was rapidly dissolving. After she reacted, she looked down at Tang Ning, and for a moment, her face showed extreme hesitation. But it was only for a moment. The next moment, Butcher Zheng's eyes widened. He put the butcher knife back into his waist, covered the little girl's eyes, and said, "Nanan, don't look." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 102. In the governor's office, 7 bodies were neatly laid out on the ground. A constable checked from left to right, his face somewhat unbelievable, swallowed a few mouthfuls of saliva, and said with difficulty, "Sir, all 7 people committed suicide. Preliminary judgment is that they should be hired as assassins." The middle-aged envoy of the Chu state suppressed his anger, looked at the governor Dong, and said word by word, "Sir Dong, I think you should give us an explanation for this matter." Even though Dong Qunyi had been in a high position for many years and had long developed the ability to remain calm in the face of emergencies, he still couldn't help sweating and trembling at this moment. The envoy of the Chu state was assassinated in Lingzhou and was seriously injured. This is not just a simple assassination. This matter concerns the diplomatic relations between the two countries. If you are not careful, you will step into the abyss. He, Dong Qunyi, can't bear such a big responsibility. He gritted his teeth and said, "Don't worry, envoy. I have ordered the whole city to be sealed off. We will definitely find the murderer." 3 days, the Chu envoy looked at him and said, "I will only give you 3 days. If the murderer is not caught after 3 days, I will write to your Chen emperor and ask him to give us an explanation." After that, he waved his sleeves and left. When he walked out of the governor's office, his face became even paler, and his hands tucked in his sleeves trembled slightly. He looked at an envoy from Chu who was walking from a distance and asked hurriedly, "How is it, is Lord Li okay?" The envoy immediately said, "It's just a skin injury. The doctor said there is nothing serious, but the remaining poison has not been cleared, and it takes time to recuperate. It's good that it's okay, it's good that it's okay." The middle-aged envoy breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Take me to see Lord Li." In the governor's office, Governor Dong's face had turned iron blue. "How come there are so many death warriors in Lingzhou? What are you doing?" Governor Dong pointed at the group of constables below, spitting everywhere. Everyone could only bow their heads to receive the training. The constable named Xiu Qingfeng raised his head, looked at Governor Dong, and said, "Sir, so many death warriors are dispatched at once. I'm afraid no one in Lingzhou has such a big hand. Could it be?" Dong Qunyi naturally knew the existence of death warriors. Many of the long-standing clans would train some death warriors from childhood. These people were instilled with the idea of not caring about life and death and obeying orders from childhood. They can no longer be called human beings. When they grow up, they become the killing tools of those clans, helping them do things that cannot be brought to the surface. Death warriors need to be trained from childhood. This process will take more than 10 years or even decades, and it will cost a lot of manpower, material resources, and financial resources. Generally speaking, without decades of foundation, it is impossible to train death warriors. What's more, there are 7 at a time. Such a loss will hurt even the big clans in the capital. However, only the big families in the capital could do such a thing. Could it be that someone in the capital intended to assassinate the Chu envoy? But if they wanted to assassinate, they could do it when they arrived in the capital. Why did they have to do it in Lingzhou? Dong Qunyi instantly felt that he was involved in a huge conspiracy. When he thought of this, he was extremely depressed. He stepped on the broken arm and said angrily, "Find it, dig 3 feet deep, and find the escaped assassin for me." Outside Lingzhou city, more than 10 miles away, a carriage was on the way to the capital. In the carriage, the old man with the broken arm was as pale as paper, and half of his body was stained red with blood. In the corner of the carriage, a 5 or 6-year-old child looked at him with fear on his face. He lifted the curtain with his foot and urged the driver coldly, "Faster." The driver turned around, looked at the child in the corner, gritted his teeth, and waved the whip a little faster. When Tang Ning opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the face of Dr. Sun. Then "Su are you?" who immediately surrounded him with a worried look on his face. "Zhonggai Tang Yao Yao." Zhonggai asked worriedly, "How do you feel?" Tang Ning held his forehead and sat up, saying, "I feel a little dizzy." Dr. Sun looked at him, shook his head, and said, "The remaining poison in your body has not yet disappeared. You need to rest for a few days." Tang Ning came back to his senses and immediately asked, "Is Xinyu okay? Is Xiao Li okay?" Zhonggai said quickly, "Xiao Yu is fine and has been taken home. Xiao Li was injured, but his life is not in danger." Tang Ning breathed a sigh of relief and suppressed some thoughts in his mind. He asked, "There is another assassin. Have you caught him?" "Not yet. He has been wanted throughout the city," Tang Yao Yao said, then looked at him and asked, "What happened today?" Tang Ning still remembers the 2 short sentences said by the straw raincoat man. The man said she looked like a lady. Which lady did she look like? He also said that this was the last time. Could it be that they were also responsible for what happened in the alley last time? He was still confused in his heart, so he naturally couldn't explain anything to Tang Yao Yao and the others. He shook his head, indicating that he didn't know. A figure walked in from outside. Li Tianlan's arms were bandaged. Tang Ning was shocked and hurriedly asked, "Why are you here instead of taking care of your injuries?" Li Tianlan looked at Tang Ning and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, I got you into trouble." Tang Ning hurriedly shook her head and said, "No, I got you into trouble. Those people were obviously coming for him." Li Tianlan was just affected. If it weren't for her, Tang Ning would be in danger today. He was afraid that he would have to follow the same path as a few months ago. At that time, there may not be as good luck as last time. Li Tianlan didn't listen to his explanation, and the apology on his face became even stronger, and he said, "They are here for the envoys. Since you are with me, they should regard you as the envoys of Chu state." "No. Other than envoys, what other reason could make them send out so many dead soldiers? It's really not. We have sent a message back to China and also sent a message to Emperor Chen. This matter will not end like this." Tang Ning didn't explain. This already involved the diplomatic relations between the 2 countries and he couldn't interfere with it. From now on, the Chen government should be more attentive in investigating the case, which can be considered a good thing. He felt his throat was dry, so he licked his lips, and then unconsciously took a second lick. He felt that the taste of his lips was a little different today. A trace of uneasiness appeared on Li Tianlan's face, and he said, "I'm relieved that you're fine. I'll leave first." After saying that, without waiting for Tang Ning to persuade her to stay, she turned around and left. Tang Ning looked at her leaving back and said, "Thanks to her today, otherwise, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to see you." Zhou Yisuru's face turned pale. From Tang Ning's words, it was not difficult for them to hear the danger of the situation at that time. "As long as it's okay, Chen Yuxian patted his chest and said, "Let's all go out and let Ninger have a good rest." After Zhou Yi and the others exited one after another, Tang Ning was left alone in the room again. Still feeling dizzy, he lay down on the bed again. He closed his eyes, but he was not resting. The scene on the long street today appeared in his mind again. The body and face of the man in the coir raincoat were hidden under the coir raincoat and cloak, but his voice still echoed in Tang Ning's mind. "Miss, who is the miss? Who is the old man hidden under the cloak? Was the accident a few months ago caused by them?" Tang Ning was not only depressed, but also a little angry, even angry. He didn't provoke anyone, he studied hard and made progress every day, he was charitable and helped beggars, and while realizing the value of his life, he actively contributed to society. How twisted is human nature and how corrupt is his moral character, that he would send so many dead soldiers to assassinate him. Who did the previous Tang Ning mess with? The enemy is in the dark and we are in the light. He doesn't know anything, he doesn't know who they are, and he doesn't know when they will appear again. It's best not to let him know. Tang Ning didn't listen to her mother-in-law and lay down at home to rest. His health was fine and he went out the next morning. This time Peng Chen followed him every step of the way. Tang Yao Yao was worried and followed him out. When Tang Ning walked to Third Uncle's shop, Butcher Zheng was chopping meat, raising and lowering his knife at a speed that was dizzying. The 10 pounds of lean meat stuffing, 10 pounds of fat meat stuffing, and 10 pounds of cartilage stuffing that you want have all been cut. Tang Ning saw the silly smile on his face again, but she still couldn't connect him with the master who drove away the man in black with a single blow yesterday. In a corner somewhere, the beggar mother and daughter were still there. Not far from them, the old beggar was holding a wine bottle and sipping it leisurely. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 103. What happened yesterday should be thanked to Li Tianlan, and more importantly, Butcher Zheng. He was the one who summoned the official, but other than that, he did not reveal any more details. Including the time when he killed the last man in raincoat with one sword. For the government, this is not important. What is important is the identity of those people in coir raincoats. The relationship between Chen and Chu has been stable for many years. The assassination of an envoy from another country in one country is very likely to affect the relationship between the two countries. This is not what either party wants to see. But no matter what, it was Butcher Zheng who saved them. Tang Ning walked into the butcher shop, bowed her hands to him, and said, "Thank you, senior, for helping me." "Hey, I'm just a pig butcher, not a senior." Butcher Zheng waved his hands repeatedly and said, "If you really want to thank me, just give me a new knife. If you cut other meat with that knife, you won't be able to use it. It's time to cut the pork again." "It should." Tang Ning nodded, pinched her daughter's chubby face, and walked out of the butcher shop. Since he didn't want to be disturbed, Tang Ning would not continue to pester him. Those masters who secluded themselves from the world generally didn't like to be disturbed. Tang Yao Yao glanced at Butcher Zheng with a suspicious look. Not only Tang Ning, but also she couldn't figure out that a butcher selling meat on the street could be some kind of martial arts master. She walked up to Tang Ning and asked in a low voice, "Is he really a martial arts master? It doesn't look like it. Are you hallucinating after being poisoned yesterday? You can't beat Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan is no match for the assassin. He cut off one of the assassin's arms with one strike. Do you think he is a martial arts master? Even Tang Yajing can call himself a martial arts master. After all, Butcher Zheng should be a master, master, master." Tang Yao Yao looked at him dissatisfied, "Who can't beat Li Tianlan?" Although Tang Yao Yao and Li Tianlan had never fought before, Tang Ning had seen the two of them taking action, and she was almost sure that Tang Yao Yao would not be able to defeat Li Tianlan. Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I'll just give you an example. Why don't you use someone else to give you an example? Why can't I beat Li Tianlan? Please explain it clearly to me. Tang Ning realized that she had done another stupid thing. Tang Yaji no longer cared about whether Butcher Zhen was a martial arts master. She only cared about who was more powerful, between herself and Li Tianlan. Tang Ning stopped, looked at her, and said, "How about you two compete before she recovers from her injury?" Tang Yao thought for a while and said, "Why should I listen to you?" Just now, Tang Ning was only 80% sure that Tang Yao couldn't defeat Li Tianlan, but now she was 100% sure. He sat at a table outside the breakfast shop and looked at the old beggar. The old beggar was holding a wine jug in his hand, which looked very delicate. He raised his neck, hung the wine jug in the air, shook it vigorously, and after shaking out the last drop of wine, he threw the wine jug aside, and then he took out a huge gourd from his back and opened it carefully, treating it like a treasure. He just took a small sip, quickly covered the gourd, closed his eyes, and looked very satisfied. From a distance away, Tang Ning also smelled the aroma of wine wafting towards her. Gudong. Peng Chen beside him swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Tang Ning walked up to the old beggar, knelt down and asked, "Where did the old man go a few days ago? He has been missing for several days." The old beggar raised his eyes and looked at him and said, "I went to the capital. Although Ling's Ganlubai tastes good, the capital's 1,000 Days Drunk tastes pretty good too. Occasionally I need to change the taste." Tang Ning asked again, "Does the old man like to drink?" The old beggar let out a wine belch, with a squinting expression on his face, and said, "That's natural. In this world, beautiful people and good wine cannot be let down. Let me tell you, although the wine in the capital is not as good as Lingzhou, but the beauty of the capital, tisk tisk, that's the best." This old beggar could freely switch between the old man and the old prostitute. Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "Old man, do you have any secret books for sale here?" The old beggar looked at him and said, "I brought those few books with me when I came out." "You bought them all? How can there be any other secret books? But," he changed his voice and added, "if you can give me 100 taels of silver, I can make an exception and give you some advice. Let me tell you, there are many people in the world who want to seek my advice, but I don't have any promise, if it weren't for the lack of money to buy wine recently." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "So, senior's martial arts must be very high?" "Absolutely high." The old beggar took another sip of wine, waved his hand and said, "How about it, do you want to think about it?" Tang Yao handed over a banknote from the side and said, "This is 100 taels." The old beggar was startled, and reached out to take the banknote. After looking at it uncertainly, he immediately put it in his arms, looked at Tang Yao, and asked, "The little girl has encountered a bottleneck in her martial arts practice recently?" Bar. A look of surprise appeared on Tang Yao's face, and she asked, "How can I break through?" The old beggar smoothed his dirty and messy beard and said, "It is inevitable for martial arts practitioners to encounter bottlenecks. As long as you practice diligently, you will be able to break through one day." Tang Yao's face darkened, she looked at the old beggar and said, "Give me the money back." The old beggar shook his head and said, "I'm not afraid to tell you, I can only get in and out of here, whether it's silver or banknotes. Will you give it or not?" "No." Snapped. Tang Yao slapped a green brick in the corner, and the green brick broke into several pieces. The old beggar took out the banknote respectfully, handed it to her with both hands, and said with a smile, "Just kidding, little girl, don't mind, don't mind." Tang Yao glanced at Tang Ning, sat back down, and never looked at the old beggar again. The old beggar looked at Tang Ning again and asked, "How about you give me 10 taels and I can give you some advice?" Tang Ning took out a piece of silver, but didn't hand it to him. The old beggar looked at the silver in his hand, swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and asked, have you encountered a bottleneck in your martial arts practice recently? Tang Ning stood up and turned around to leave without hesitation. The old beggar said hurriedly, "Don't go, don't give me advice, how about I help you tell your fortune?" Tang Ning turned to look at him. "Can you tell fortunes?" The old beggar smiled and said, "How can I do this if I don't know how to predict fortune? Seek good luck and avoid bad luck, and travel around the world." He looked at Tang Ning, thought for a moment, and said, "I see your hall is shining brightly, and there is a faint red light. This is the fate of the peach blossom. If you are lucky, it will be the peach blossom. If you are not lucky, it will be the peach blossom. Oh, this is incredible. You have made a lot of mistakes in your life." Tang Ning turned around and left. As a married man, he hadn't even given her his first kiss yet. What a bullshit he was doing. He sat back at the table and ordered a bowl of tofu puffs and a drawer of steamed buns. Tang Yao Yao looked at him and asked, "Is this the peerless master you call him?" Tang Ning couldn't explain to her. This sloppy old beggar didn't have any sense of superiority in either his image or his actions. She had no idea which of his words were truth or lies. Even I also had some doubts. Had he really made a mistake? This time the temptation ended in failure. Tang Yao Yao waved her hand and waved behind her, "Xiao Yu, come here, what are you doing standing there?" Tang Ning turned around and saw Fang Xiaopang standing in the distance. She had been standing there for who knows how long and had not yet come over. The number of guards behind her increased from 2 to 6. After Tang Yao Yao waved, she slowly walked over to Tang Ning, sniffed and said, "I'm sorry, it's all my fault, I don't blame you, please sit down quickly." Tang Ning rubbed her head, turned around and said, "Uncle, please put on 5 more drawers of buns." I don't want to eat." Fang Xiaopang looked at him, shook his head, and said, "I can only come out for a while, and I will go back soon." She glanced at Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao, waved her hands and said, "I'm leaving." Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao walked back. When they passed Fang Mansion, they saw a figure running past Fang Mansion from a distance. She ran very slowly and very hard, as if she would stop the next moment. But she never stopped. She just ran around Fang Mansion with difficulty, 1 lap, 2 laps, 3 laps. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 104. Tang Yao Yao watched from a distance as she was sweating profusely. She seemed to have exhausted all her strength with every step she took. A look of reluctance appeared on her face. She wanted to walk over to stop her, but Tang Ning grabbed her wrist. Tang Ning shook her head and said, "Let her run." 11-year-old Fang Xiaopang has her own perseverance in her heart. No matter what choice she makes, she should be respected. He and Tang Yao Yao stood in the distance, watching her run around, and finally fell to the ground. She refused the help of the guards, got up with difficulty, staggered, and moved back to Fang Mansion step by step. Tang Yao Yao clenched her fists and said angrily, "Damn assassin." Tang Ning thought for a moment, looked at her, and said, "These days, when Xiru and Xiaoi go out, if you have nothing to do, try to accompany them." Tang Yao Yao looked at him with a hint of doubt on his face and asked, "What do you mean?" Tang Ning took a deep breath, exhaled it slowly, and said, "Those dead warrior assassins are here for me." "What?" A look of surprise appeared on Tang Yao Yao's face, and she hurriedly asked, "Do you know who they are?" Tang Ning shook her head, "I don't know. I'm worried that they will be harmful to Xiru and Xiaoi. After all, they are hiding and we are hiding, so be careful." Tang Yao Yao nodded, clenched his fist and said, "Don't worry, if they dare to come, don't even think about going back." After speaking, he looked at Tang Ning and said, "And you, don't go out and run around blindly. If you need anything, just call me." Tang Ning nodded. Today's Lingzhou city can be said to be on alert. The only remaining man in raincoat has broken an arm. The chance of making a comeback is very small, but we still have to be on the safe side. With Tang Yaoyao here, Su Ru and Zhong Yi should be able to protect them. As for the shop, there is no need to worry too much. With Butcher Zheng here and the tight security of Lingzhou City, nothing will happen. He had just discussed it with Xiao Ru. During this period, she would stay in Zhong Mansion for the time being. In this way, almost all hidden dangers could be eliminated. As for other matters, we still have to wait for the official results. When he returned to Zhong Mansion, he found that Li Tianlan was also there. Master Xiao Li, have some tea. Zhong Mingli was busy hunting down assassins and was not at home. Chen Yuxian was very enthusiastic about Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan injured both arms and was unable to use his hands. He smiled and said, "Thank you, madam, I'm not thirsty." Chen Yuxian looked at her and said apologetically, "Thanks to Master Xiao Li yesterday, otherwise Ninger would, I really don't know how to thank you." "Don't say that, it was me who caused Tang Jiwen's trouble." Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "I should be the one to say sorry to him. I still want to thank Mr. Xiao Li for risking his life to save her." Chen Yuxian looked at her and said, "I have people prepare meals. Mr. Xiao Li should have eaten today before leaving." Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "Thank you madam for your kindness, but no need. The doctor said that I can only eat some liquid food such as white porridge in the past 2 days." Chen Yuxian smiled and said, "That's just right. Ninger's body has not been cleared of toxins, so she can only eat light meals such as porridge and soup. The kitchen is making tremella and lotus seed soup today, and Mr. Xiao Li will just eat some." Chen Yuxian's kindness was hard to resist, but Li Tianlan couldn't refuse and had no choice but to agree. Chen Yuxian waved to a maid and said, "Hua Mr. Li's hands are injured. Come over and feed him." Hua one of her personal maids, came over and bowed, saying softly, "Master Xiao Li, let me help you." Li Tianlan looked at her and said, "Thank you, Miss Hua." Tang Ning could tell that Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed. If it were him, he would definitely be uncomfortable having to be fed at such an old age. Hua fed her spoonful by spoonful. After a while, he suddenly put down the spoon, covered his stomach, and said with some embarrassment, "Madam, my stomach is a little uncomfortable." Chen Yuxian waved his hand and said, "Go, go." After Hua ran out, Chen Yuxian looked around and found that there was no maid in the room. He looked at Tang Ning and said, "Ning there is still some left. Please help feed Mr. Li to finish it." Ah, Tang Ning was a little unsure and asked, "Me? Who else is it if it's not you?" Chen Yuxian glanced at him and said, "Master Xiao Li risked his life to save you. What's wrong with you helping to feed him a few mouthfuls of food?" After Li Tianlan was stunned, he quickly said, "No, no, I'm full." Chen Yuxian smiled and said, "You're welcome, Mr. Li, just treat this place as your own home." Li Tianlan looked troubled. Tang Ning had already picked up the bowl, picked up the spoon, looked at her, and said, "Mr. Xiao Li, open your mouth. My mother-in-law has already said this. If he refuses again, wouldn't he become an ungrateful person who knows how to repay kindness?" Li Tianlan looked at him for a long time and finally opened his mouth. For some reason, Tang Ning felt a strange feeling in her heart when she looked at her slightly thin lips. He quickly put that impulse out of his mind and concentrated on feeding her. He glanced up at Zhong Yi and found that she was eating with her head down, as if she didn't care at all, which made him feel relieved. The atmosphere of the meal was awkward. Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed, and Tang Ning was equally embarrassed. After finally finishing her bowl of porridge, Tang Ning excused herself and left. Not long after returning to her room, Li Tianlan walked in. Tang Ning thought about it, looked at her and asked, "Yesterday, how did you cure my poison?" Tang Ning has always been confused about this matter. He asked Dr. Sunday the Great Huan-Dan is a good prescription for resurrecting the soul and prolonging life, detoxifying and curing diseases. So, Li Tianlan's poison was cured by the Great Huan-Dan, but what about the poison he was poisoned with? He doesn't have a special physique that is immune to all poisons. It doesn't make sense for him to get better after a good night's sleep. He actually thought of a possibility, but he didn't quite believe it, and he was a little reluctant to think about it. Li Tianlan's expression remained unchanged. After thinking for a while, he looked at Tang Ning and said, "When I woke up, there was still half of the detoxification pill left, so." Tang Ning's face turned pale instantly. She actually vomited out the half pill and stuffed it into his mouth. He was pale, covering his mouth. I'm sorry, excuse me." Seeing him running out quickly with his mouth covered, Li Tianlan was stunned for a moment. After realizing what was going on, a trace of shame and anger appeared on her face. The situation was urgent yesterday, and she couldn't afford to hesitate at all. Now that she thought about it, there was obviously a better way. She felt ashamed and annoyed. After taking a few deep breaths, she stopped thinking about it and sat down at the desk in the room. There was a thick stack of papers on the table, and she cast her eyes on it casually. Tang Ning ran out of the yard and retched for a long time, but nothing came out. Thinking of what might have happened yesterday, his stomach was churning again. Zhongyi walked over quickly, stretched out her hand, gently patted him on the back, and asked with concern, "What's wrong, are you feeling unwell?" Tang Ning stood there, and after a while, he shook his head and said, "It's okay, maybe I ate too much just now." Zhongyi patted his back gently from behind, and he felt much better. His wife was still the best. She was well educated, considerate, gentle, and understanding. She didn't care about him feeding Li Tianlan just now. Zhongyi gently helped him stroke his back. When he looked better, she looked at him faintly and said, "You just fed Miss Li." Tang Ning found more and more that dealing with women was a very difficult thing. As powerful as Tang Yaoyao and as well educated as Zhongyi, they would also be fussy about some things. In this regard, Li Tianlan didn't behave like a woman. When he walked into the room, he saw her sitting at the desk, looking at something seriously. He walked over and found that she was looking at the policy practice he did. Some of these were edited by Zhongyi, and some were not edited by her. Tang Ning looked at Li Tianlan and said, "I just wrote them randomly. I'm sorry to embarrass you, Miss Li." Li Tianlan looked up at him, shook her head after a long while, and said, "Why aren't you from my Chu country?" "What Chen or Chu country?" "Tang Ning is not from Chen or Chu. He is Chinese and does not engage in ethnic division." There was a knock on the door from behind. Tang Ning turned around and saw Fang Xiaopang walking in with a big bag on his back. She put the bag on the table and said to Tang Ning, "This is for you." Tang Ning opened the bag and saw that it was full of her snacks, cakes, candied fruits, dried fruits, etc. "Give me all these," Tang Ning looked at her in surprise. "These are not snacks, these are Fang Xiaopang's life. Does she want to die?" Fang Xiaopang looked at him and nodded firmly, "All for you. I don't want it anymore." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiaorong. Chapter 105. When Tang Ning saw Fang Xiaopang giving him all her snacks, she knew she was serious this time. She didn't eat at Zhong's house this time, even though today's dinner was particularly sumptuous, and most of it was what she liked. She just asked Tang Yaoyao if she could become as thin as her if she also learned martial arts. Of course Tang Yaoyao was very satisfied with Fang Xiaopang's insight and said, "Although martial arts is a bit tiring, it can shape your body. Which master have you seen who is fat?" What she said is not quite accurate. From a high probability, people who practice martial arts, regardless of gender, maintain very good figures. This is because of the huge amount of exercise and consumption every day, making it difficult to gain weight. But there are no absolutes. The level of martial arts is not necessarily related to the fatness or thinness of the body. Of course, at this time, he would not undermine Fang Xiaopang's self-confidence. Fang Xiaopang looked up at her and said expectantly, "Sister Tang, can I learn martial arts from you?" Of course Tang Nuxia was warm-hearted and agreed without hesitation. Tang Ning initially thought that Fang Xiaopang's weight loss was only a 3-minute exercise, and if he persisted for 2 days at most, he would be back to his original shape. No one knows better than him how attractive food is to her, and no one knows better than him how painful losing weight is for her. But even Tang Ning didn't expect that she would persist for more than half a month. In the past half-month, her body has been declining at a speed visible to the naked eye. Tang Yaoyao, Zhong Yi, and even Fang Xiaopang himself didn't notice it, but if Tang Ning compared her now with her half a month ago, it would be obvious that she had really lost weight. She reduced her daily food intake to half of a normal person and ran for an hour in the morning and evening. During this period, she also learned some basic martial arts with Tang Yaoyao. There were new changes almost every day. Although it was subtle, it accumulated day by day. Also very amazing. A lot has happened in the past month and a half. The fleeing assassin was not caught in Lingzhou. On the third day, the Chu envoy rushed to send a message to the capital. He rushed 800 miles away and the news of the envoy's assassination reached the capital. When the emperor heard the news, he was furious and ordered Song Qian to be punished by Jingdong Road to investigate the case. As a result, a major earthquake occurred in Lingzhou. When an envoy from the state of Chu was assassinated in Lingzhou, the local government in Lingzhou had no choice but to shoulder the responsibility. When the capital came to punish him, the first person to be severely punished was the governor of Lingzhou. Dong Qunyi, the governor of Lingzhou, will be transferred to Fengzhou to serve as the governor of Fengzhou. For the same governor, his move from Lingzhou to Fengzhou seemed to be an ordinary move, but in fact it was the biggest relegation. Lingzhou is adjacent to Jiangyi and is rich in products. As the governor of Lingzhou, there is still room for improvement if we take a step forward. Fengzhou is almost on the border of Chen State. Although the sky is high and the emperor is far away, there are not many constraints, but if there is no opportunity in this life, he will have to live in a foreign land forever. This was the attitude shown by the Chen state towards the envoys of the Chu state. From this incident, it can be seen that the Chu state of today is no longer the Chu state of yesterday and has the qualifications to be on an equal footing with Chen state. Fortunately, the officials under the governor were not greatly affected. Tang Ning felt great sympathy for Governor Dong in her heart. If she calculated the matter carefully, she should be the one who had caused him trouble. But thinking about how he forced his wife to marry his son, the sympathy in his heart quickly disappeared. Li Tianlan's injury was almost healed. Tang Ning went to Dr. Sun to get a secret recipe for her that would not leave scars on the wound. She was a girl after all. Although no woman in the world was bold enough to show her arms in public, her smooth if there are scars on your arms, you will definitely mind them. While sending the message to the capital, he also invited the Chu envoys to come to the capital as soon as possible. After all, they had already stayed in Lingzhou long enough. The last time Li Tianlan came to Zhong Mansion was to bid farewell to Tang Ning. Tang Ning held a wooden sword in her hand and practiced the moves from a secret book in the courtyard. Li Tianlan stood aside and looked at it, and said, "These sword moves are exquisite, but your foundation is weak, so you still can't exert their power. In a short period of time, you should focus on consolidating your basic skills." Tang Ning knew where his shortcomings were. His basic skills were too poor. However, this could not be improved overnight. He had been deliberately increasing the intensity of his exercise these days, running with Fang Xiaopang in the morning and evening, and under Zhong Yi's supervision at night. Do 100 push-ups, but improvement in this area takes time. He nodded and said, "I understand." Li Tianlan looked at him and said, You have just started practicing martial arts. It is already very rare to make such a big progress. Li Tianlan is even more powerful than Tang Yaoyao, and his eyesight is naturally not comparable to that of ordinary people. She pointed out some of his shortcomings. After Tang Ning wrote them down one by one, she smiled and said, "Come in and sit down." "No need." Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "The mission will leave tomorrow, and I'm here to say goodbye to you." Tang Ning poured a cup of tea, placed it on the stone table in the courtyard, and said, "Before I leave, I'll give you a cup of tea instead of wine." Li Tianlan took a sip and said, "See you in the capital in more than 2 months." Li Tianlan's farewell was just a farewell, without any unnecessary words, and naturally there was no sentiment of reluctance or farewell. She has always been like this, crisp and resolute. After sending her out, when she came back again, she saw Tang Yaoyao sitting on the wall. "What are you doing sitting there?" Tang Ning looked at her in surprise and said, "Come down, there is a trick I haven't figured out yet. Please tell me more." Tang Yaoyao glanced at him, turned around and said, "Ask your Miss Li what I want to do. Didn't she just say it very well? She is better than me. Just listen to her." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I just came to say goodbye." "Is she leaving?" Tang Yaoyao jumped down from the wall, a hint of joy appeared on her face, and then she became serious again, curled her lips and said, "Whether she leaves or not, what does it have to do with me?" She walked towards the stone table, then looked back at Tang Ning and said, "Why are you still standing there?" Tang Ning was surprised. "What?" Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and said, "Didn't you say there's something you don't understand? Why don't you come here quickly?" Tang Ning had already figured out her tricks a long time ago. She would be arrogant and she would get better soon. In the past, he always felt that Tang Yao was unfeminine. After being around her for a long time, especially after meeting Li Tianlan, she realized that Tang Ning the goblin was actually the most feminine of all the people he knew, a completely different type from Xiao Ru's cuteness and Zhong Yi's gentleness. The Chu delegation left Lingzhou the next day. Almost all the local officials in Lingzhou came to see him off. The excitement on their faces was beyond words, and they almost shed tears of gratitude. They only stayed in Lingzhou for a short period of more than a month, then turned Lingzhou over twice and sent away a governor. This was not an envoy, he was simply a god of plague. After sending away the god of plague, they could finally live a comfortable life for a few days. As for whether the other party would continue to harm the capital, no one cared. Tang Ning did not follow the Lingzhou officials. He stood outside the city gate, waved to a carriage belonging to the delegation, and watched the convoy disappear from sight. It was now November, and 2 months later, he would embark on the same path as them. The capital, the imperial palace. Tang Hui, the minister of rites, walked out of a large hall, turned around and cupped his hands to a fat eunuch, and said, "Eunuch Wei, there is no need to send any more gifts." The eunuch had a kind face and a smile on his face, and said, "Your Majesty attaches great importance to the year-end ceremony, and Mr. Tang should also pay attention to it." Tang Hui nodded and said, "This is my official responsibility. Please rest assured, Your Majesty." The eunuch smiled and said, "After the grand ceremony, Mr. Tang will prepare for this provincial examination again. During this period, I am afraid it will be a lot of hard work." Tang Hui smiled and said, "It should be." The eunuch nodded and said, "Your Majesty has one more thing to say, please ask me to bring it to Lord Tang." Tang Hui looked solemn, cupped his hands and said, "Eunuch Wei, please speak." The eunuch smiled, looked at him with a deep look, and said, "It is not easy for the Tang family to train a few dead soldiers, I won't do it next time." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Wrong xiao wrong. Chapter 106. Tang Huai's expression changed and he laughed dryly. Eunuch Wei, what do you mean? We are just a servant who delivers messages. Eunuch Wei looked at Tang Huai and said with a smile, Master Tang should understand what your majesty means. Let's go, your majesty is still waiting there. Tang Huai clasped his fists again and said, Eunuch Wei, walk slowly. He watched Eunuch Wei disappear from sight, with a gloomy look on his face, and the fists in his sleeves clenched and unclenched. In the end, he just gritted his teeth and turned around to leave. In the deep palace, Emperor Chen put down a secret envelope and asked casually, Wei Jian, what do you think of this matter? What do you think, my servant? Eunuch Wei had a look of confusion on his face and said, I just stand in front of His Majesty and look. Chen Huang was startled, then pointed at him angrily and funny, and said, You have been with me all your life, and you know how to be harmonious. You have never thought of sharing my worries for me. Eunuch Wei said helplessly, Your Majesty, this old slave is stupid and can't compare with the great lords in the court. My duty is to serve your Majesty comfortably. Emperor Chen waved his hand and said, 7 dead soldiers were sent to Lingzhou at one time. Tang Huai was so generous that he almost killed the envoys of Chu state. What did he want to do? Eunuch Wei walked to Emperor Chen, thought for a while, and whispered, although Master Tang's move is a bit outrageous, the Tang family should still be loyal to His Majesty. I don't doubt his loyalty. Chen Huang shook his head and said, but the Tang family's actions over the years are indeed a bit excessive. Eunuch Wei raised his eyes and lowered his head again, but he stopped answering. As the Minister of Rites, Tang Huai was responsible for the imperial examinations. He had disciples all over the court and all over the country. In recent years, he had become a little too powerful. Huang Chen opened the secret fold again, looked at the name on the secret fold, shook his head and said, 17 years later, Tang Huai still has such murderous intentions towards his nephew, Tangning. Why does this name sound familiar? Eunuch Wei thought for a while and said, Your Majesty, the Lingzhou Jiwen who contributed the flood control strategy and saved the court hundreds of thousands of taels of silver every year seems to be called Tangning. Is it him? Chen Huang immediately recalled and murmured, is he the abandoned baby of the Tang family? Eunuch Wei nodded and said, looking at Mr. Tang's reaction, it should be right. Tang family, Tangning. Emperor Chen thought for a while and said, I ordered Zhang Shisheng to draft a decree. Lingzhou Prefecture tried to solve the problem of Tangning in the Yuan dynasty. If he made suggestions to control the floods, he would be rewarded with a jade belt and 50 pieces of silk. According to the order, Eunuch Wei looked slightly different, responded, and said, Your Majesty, the news just came from Lingzhou. The Chu state envoy has set off from Lingzhou and will arrive in the capital soon. Chu state. Emperor Chen whispered, with a gloomy look on his face, Chu state has seen a large number of talented people emerge in recent years. Looking back at our court, some people in the court only know how to form cliques, and some people only live in plain sight. There are really not many that can be of great use. If things continue like this, there will be endless troubles. Eunuch Wei thought for a while and said, Your Majesty, don't worry. Not long ago, many talents emerged from various state examinations. With a little training, they can become pillars of the court in a few years. The court cannot be filled with mediocre people, but it cannot be filled with all smart people. However, there can be a shortage of mediocre people, but there cannot be a shortage of smart people. Emperor Chen was silent for a while, and then said, Zhang Hao is right, our imperial examination it's time to make a move. Tang Mansion, somewhere in a dark room. The one-armed old man knelt on the ground and said in a hoarse voice, Master, this old slave deserves to die. Tang Huai looked at him and asked expressionlessly, 17 years ago, someone picked him up from the snow, half a year ago, it was your people who found those rogues from Lingzhou to do things badly, This time, the Tang family lost 7 dead soldiers. What was the reason? The old slave didn't expect that he was actually with the envoy of the Chu state, and the envoy of the Chu state was protected by experts. The old man hissed a few words, and then said, "Master, give the old slave another chance." "I gave you a chance. Who gave me a chance?" Tang Hui looked at him and said angrily, "I gave you a chance, will your majesty give me a chance?" The old man's expression changed and he was shocked. Could it be? Tang Hui waved his hand and said, "This matter has nothing to do with my Tang family, there is no need to mention it again." The old man was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, "Old slave, I understand." Tang Hui closed his eyes and said, "Get out." Yes, the old man bowed and bowed, then slowly withdrew. Boom. After the old man walked out, Tang Hui clenched his fist and smashed it against the wall. "Uncle Han, where did you go some time ago and when did you come back?" The girl was walking in the Tang mansion and saw a figure in front of her. She walked over quickly. When she walked in front of her, her expression suddenly changed and she asked, "Uncle Han, what's wrong with your arm?" The old man smiled and said, "I went back to my hometown and met an enemy and accidentally broke it." The girl looked at his empty sleeves, frowned, and asked, "Who is so cruel? Has anyone reported him to the police?" The old man shook his head and said, "Miss Schweier, don't worry, he's not much better than me." The girl looked at him, shook her head and said, "You are so old and you still learn how to fight." The old man smiled, lowered his head and said nothing. The girl looked at him helplessly and warned, "Then you must remember to see the doctor." The former Lingzhou governor Dong Qunyi packed up and rushed to Fengzhou to take up his post a few days after receiving the imperial order. It is said that the new Lingzhou governor of the imperial court will arrive in Lingzhou in the next few days. The local officials of Lingzhou were a little uneasy. Although Governor Dong was not easy to deal with, they had worked together for so many years and had been at peace. As for the new governor, no one knew who he was or what his temper was, so they were naturally a little uneasy. This matter was something that the father-in-law and the local officials of Lingzhou needed to worry about. It had been a while since Li Tianlan left Lingzhou. Tang Ning had been living a very fulfilling life these days. He read books and ran every day. He originally wanted to lure out a few assassins, but the other party seemed to have really left Lingzhou. This disappointed Tang Ning. He didn't even know who the enemy was. Who could he seek revenge on? Every time he went out, Peng Chen followed him not far behind, and Tang Yaoyao usually followed him and Fang Xiaopang to exercise together. Fang Xiaopang's desperate way of losing weight is wrong. Although dieting or excessive exercise can indeed help lose a lot of weight in a short period of time, it is not healthy. She now only runs for half an hour every morning and evening, and pays more attention to nutritional balance when eating. In addition, she also does some anaerobic and aerobic exercises taught by Tang Ning. Although the effect is slower than before, it will not harm the body. After exercising in the morning, she and Fang Xiaopang have breakfast in front of the shop of the third uncle. Lu Laoer holds a bun in his mouth. After swallowing it in a few bites, he looks at Tang Ning and says with a smile, "Boss, we got another street yesterday." Lu Laoer originally called him young master. Since Tang Ning gave him a large sum of silver and asked him to establish the beggars gang and recruit beggars from Lingzhou, his name for Tang Ning has changed. If the beggars gang is the largest gang in the world, this gang leader will naturally be very impressive, but now the beggars gang is only a beggar group of about 100 people. This gang leader seems to be useless. In order to avoid beggars coming up to him and saluting him wherever he went, except for Lu Laoer and a few key members around him, the beggars in Lingzhou only knew that they had a gang leader, but they didn't know who the gang leader was. Lu Laoer ate a bun, wiped his mouth, and said, "Gang leader, a brother in our gang seemed to have seen the person who attacked you in the alley that morning a few months ago. Although they were all covered at the time, one of them was bald, and his left foot was a little lame, and there was a scar on his forehead. I have asked my brothers to keep an eye on him. Tang Ning put down his chopsticks, looked at him, and asked, "Where is he?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 107. Zhang Biao is a well-known gangster in Lingzhou City. He had a serious illness when he was a child and almost died. Later, his family found a charlatan for him and used two folk remedies. His life was saved, but all the hair on his head fell out. Zhang Biao grew up in a poor family and had never read a book. He wandered the streets all day long and fought fiercely with others. Although he was beaten and lame in one leg, he still gained a bad reputation. All the local gangsters in Lingzhou knew it. There is a bald man named Zhang on Changping Street who is not easy to mess with. Zhang Biao also got acquainted with a group of fair-weather friends. He could not do all kinds of evil in the city and bully men and women, but he was also a being that no one dared to mess with on two streets. At this time, Zhang Biao was sitting at a noodle stall on the street eating noodles with a few of his fair-weather friends. Zhang Biao wiped his mouth, put down the bowl, and said to the waiter inside, "Brother, let's have another bowl of noodles." The waiter looked embarrassed, looked at them, pointed to a dozen empty bowls stacked aside, and said, "Sir, have you paid for these first?" Snapped. Zhang Biao slapped his hand on the table and said angrily, "What's wrong, are you afraid that I can't afford the money?" The guy immediately said, "Don't dare, don't dare." Zhang Biao looked at him and said disdainfully, "Let me tell you, in this Lingzhou city, whether it is Ziwixiang Tower or Beihua Garden, I often go there and spend dozens of taels of silver in one night. I can't afford it. You have a few bowls of noodles, so stop talking nonsense and hurry up and cook them." Ziwixianglu and Beihua Yuan are the most famous restaurants and brothels in Lingzhou City, and they are also famous for selling gold. These few poor people eating noodles on the street might not even be able to get in. The waiter glanced at they whispered, "Who can't tell lies? If you can, go to Ziwixianglu. What kind of noodles can you eat here?" Zhang Biao raised his eyebrows, "What did you say?" The waiter immediately said, "Please wait a moment, sir, the noodles will be here soon." He turned his back to cook the noodles. When he put down the noodles, he spat into the pot and whispered, "What kind of noodles do you want to eat? Just eat my saliva." Zhang Biao looked at the obedient man and touched his bald head with satisfaction. A thin man next to him looked at him and whispered, "Brother Biao, when can we do it again?" "We don't have to do it again. You can eat noodles here and play with the girls from Beihua Yuan." "What's a vote for?" "Half a year ago, that big job." "Shut up," Zhang Biao glared at him and whispered, "You should keep this matter to yourself. No one is allowed to mention it. If it is accidentally leaked, I will kill you." The man immediately lowered his head to eat the noodles and did not dare to speak any more. A person next to him slapped him on the head and said, "What's the difference between the girl from Beihua Yuan and your fifth girl? It's not all a matter of trembling. Just eat your noodles and play with your fifth girl at night." Zhang Biao's face was slightly gloomy. He was still a little scared when he thought about what happened half a year ago. For a life, the other party actually gave them 1,000 taels of silver. At that time, he was hot-headed and agreed. Afterwards, no matter what he thought, he felt a little guilty. It wasn't until half a year later that everything was fine, and he finally agreed. Relax. 1,000 taels of silver had been squandered long ago, but if there were any big jobs from before, he would not dare to take them again. "Sir, here comes the noodles." The waiter placed the noodles in front of Zhang Biao. Zhang Biao picked up the chopsticks and accidentally turned his eyes and found two beggars in the corner next to him looking at him. He felt angry, slammed his chopsticks on the table, and said angrily, "What are you looking at?" The two beggars did not show panic or fear as he expected. One of them stood up holding a wooden stick, glanced at him, and said lightly, What's wrong with you? No one dared to talk to him like this on this street, let alone a beggar. Zhang Biao stood up suddenly, and several people behind him also gathered around him aggressively. What's the matter, do you want to fight? The beggar looked at them, took a step back, and said loudly, brothers, someone wants to fight. Wow! While Zhang Biao and others were stunned in place, dozens of beggars immediately appeared from several surrounding alleys. They were all holding wooden sticks and surrounded the few people. This is the headquarters of the beggar gang in Lingzhou. Since a few days ago, the beggar gang has become the largest gang in Lingzhou in terms of numbers. Zhang Biao swallowed, sat back, licked his lips, and said, brother, if you have something to say, speak it carefully. Get out of the way, everyone, get out of the way. What are you doing here? Several police officers separated from the crowd and walked in from outside. In Zhang Biao's eyes, the hateful faces of these detectives had never been so kind. A police officer looked at him and asked, are you Zhang Biao? Zhang Biao's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't done anything wrong recently. At most, he slept with Ahu's wife when she wasn't at home. Isn't this illegal? He nodded and said, I am Zhang Biao. The agent pointed at him and the few people beside him, waved his hand and said, take them all away. Zhang Biao hurriedly defended, brother, we did not break the law, you. A young man walked out from behind the policeman, looked at him with a smile, and asked, do you still remember me? The young man had a handsome face and a kind smile, but to Zhang Biao, this smile looked like the smile of an evil ghost crawling out of the underworld. Not like, at all. Half a year ago, he repeatedly confirmed that the other person had no breathing and heartbeat before leaving the alley. In other words, the person who appeared in front of him died half a year ago. Zhang Biao's body trembled, with a look of extreme horror on his face. He collapsed to the ground instantly, and a strong stench came from his crotch. He kept muttering, ghost, there is a ghost. Tang Ning took a step back, a little further away from him, waved her hand and said, take them all back. When the waiter at the noodle stall saw Zhang Biao and others being taken away, a look of pleasure appeared on his face. He glanced away, and his expression changed drastically when he saw the piles of empty bowls on the table. When Tang Ning went back, she happened to run into her father-in-law, so she went back to Zhong Mansion with him. His father-in-law seemed to be in a bad mood. During the meal, Tang Ning realized that the new governor of Lingzhou had arrived today. This Chu governor was transferred from the capital to Lingzhou. He did not hold an important position in the capital, so it was impossible to say whether he was promoted or demoted. After Lingzhou officials got the news, they went to greet him early in the morning. There are 3 things a new official should do when he takes office. The governor has just taken office, so he naturally wants to make some achievements to show his ability and majesty. The local officials in Lingzhou were already prepared, but they did not expect that the other party would just arrive in Lingzhou. On the first day of state, the fire started. The county magistrates of Lingzhou were ordered to clean up the major cases accumulated in the county within 3 months, otherwise it would have an impact on the evaluation at the end of the year. As a governor, he has a great influence on the performance evaluation of state officials. The right to speak. Father-in-law, don't worry about this matter. In the past 6 months, the security in Yong'an County has not been good, but there are no unsolved cases. Although there were 2 cases that were not solved half a year ago, compared to other county magistrates, the pressure is already very high. Smaller. After eating, Tang Ning told him and went directly to the county prison. We are unjust, we have done nothing, let us out. As soon as he entered the cell, he heard someone shouting loudly. He walked to a cell and saw Zhang Biao and others being imprisoned in the cell, holding the wooden bars of the cell and shouting injustice. Tang Ning pointed at Zhang Biao and said, bring him out. Zhang Biao was brought back to the innermost cell. Tang Ning did not let Peng Chen and others follow. She walked over alone and looked at Zhang Biao in the cell, but did not speak. Zhang Biao met his eyes and lowered his head the next moment. Tang Ning watched for a while, then suddenly asked, "Do you still remember me?" Zhang Biao raised his head, looked at him again, and said, "I don't know you, why did you bring me in? I didn't break the law. Since you don't know me, why are you panicking just now? Why are you pulling your pants?" An unnatural look appeared on Zhang Biao's face. He shook his head and said, "I don't know what you are talking about." When he said this, he looked up again and saw the same familiar face. But his mood had calmed down at the moment. In broad daylight, if the other person can stand here and talk to him, it means that he is not a ghost. Maybe he was too panicked at the time and mistakenly thought that the person was dead. As long as he is a human and not a ghost, he has nothing to fear. People are not as scary as ghosts. Don't you know? Tang Ning smiled, showing 2 rows of white teeth, and waved, "Forget it if you don't know." Zhang Biao raised his head and glanced at him. When he saw the smile on his face, he couldn't help but shiver, feeling a chill coming from the depths of his soul. This chill was far worse than when he saw ghosts in the street during the day. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 108. Tang Ning walked out of the innermost cell. Peng Chen looked at him and asked, "How is it?" "I have a few more questions to ask him." Tang Ning shook his head, looked at him again, and asked, "Is it okay to lock them up for a few days?" Peng Chen shook his head and said, "A few days, no problem." After he finished speaking, he looked at Tang Ning again and asked, "Do you want to separate them and interrogate them separately?" "Not this time." Tang Ning shook his head, looked at the innermost cell, and whispered a few words in his ear. Peng Chen looked at him in surprise, nodded, and said, "It should be okay. I just need to tell the adults. Then I'll leave it to you." Tang Ning patted his shoulder and walked out of the county jail. The jail was the darkest place in the entire county, and the air was filled with the smell of decay. In addition to the jailers, even the bailiffs were unwilling to stay any longer. The cell had walls on 3 sides and only one side was a wooden fence. When the only side was blocked with wooden boards and the small window above was covered, the whole cell would become pitch dark. Zhang Biao was imprisoned in such a cell. The jailer and yamen runners in charge of the cell had already been ordered to open a small partition in the corner at a fixed time every day and send him steamed buns and water, but they could not communicate with him even a word during this process. On the first day, Zhang Biao was still shouting loudly that he was wronged. After about a day and a night, the next morning, only by sticking carefully to the wooden board could he hear the occasional movement from the cell. Peng Chen came from a distance, looked at a jailer, and asked, "What's going on?" The jailer looked at the sealed cell with some fear, shook his head, and said, "There was a voice at the beginning, but I haven't heard him speak for a long time now." A yamen runner came in with 2 steamed buns and water, lifted a small wooden board in the corner, and put the steamed buns and water in. A voice soon came from the cell. "Brother, officer, what time is it now?" Zhang Biao's voice was already a bit irritable and anxious. The yamen runner said nothing, put the food and water in, and prepared to close the board again. "Officer, say something to me." "Brother, just say a word." "Brother, what's your mother's surname?" After the board was closed, the sound inside became much smaller, but the anxiety and mania in Zhang Biao's voice could still be heard, and several people even heard a sense of madness from it. The jailer's face turned pale. In the past 2 days, he witnessed Zhang Biao's change from vigorous to quiet, and finally to such an anxious and violent appearance. He had also thought that if it were him, he would go crazy in such a dark place, where no one spoke and no sound could be heard. He looked at the cell surrounded by 4 sides, shook his head, and sighed, "What a sin." Zhang Biao had been locked up in the cell for 4 days. Since the 3rd day, He had not eaten a bite of steamed buns or drunk a drop of water. He threw the steamed buns out and overturned the bowl of water. He just pulled the hand of the yamen runner who brought him food through the small mouth for delivering food, and begged the yamen runner to say a word to him with tears and tears. He cried so hard that anyone who heard it was sad and anyone who saw it cried. Of course, talking to him was against discipline. If you said a word, you would lose your salary this month, and if you kept silent, your salary would triple. Not to mention talking, in front of him, the yamen runner would not even fart. Tang Ning not only wanted to avenge his other self, he also wanted to find out who was behind them. Zhang Biao didn't have the ability to train 7 assassins, so this was probably the only clue he could catch. He played flying chess with Tang Yaoyao in the yard. He played it to relieve his boredom when he was bored. He won and lost when he played with Qing but he never won when he played with Tang Yaoyao. He relied on luck to roll the dice, but Tang Yaoyao could get whatever she wanted. If she wanted, the Tang family wouldn't have to do business at all, and could make a fortune by opening a casino. Fang Xiaopang was learning to cook with Zhongyi in the kitchen. She had just wanted to try it on a whim yesterday, but Tang Ning unexpectedly discovered that she had a good talent in cooking. Although it was her first time cooking, she couldn't compare with Zhongyi's cooking skills, but the 2 dishes she cooked were delicious and received praise from everyone. A high-level foodie must not only know how to eat, but also how to cook. Fang Xiaopang transferred her obsession with eating to cooking. She only ate 2 bites of the dishes she cooked, but the satisfaction on her face was greater than when she could eat freely before. Peng Chen walked over from a distance, looked at him, and whispered, "Zhang Biao wanted to hit the wall to commit suicide, but was rescued. His situation is not very good now." Tang Ning put down the dice, said something to Tang Yaoyao, and then walked towards the county jail. Zhang Biao had been brought out, tied up on a chair, his face was a little hideous, and the whole person looked very manic. Staying in such an environment for 4 days, anyone would be manic. In fact, he was not only manic, but also nervous, anxious, fearful, distracted, slow-thinking, and had illusions and hallucinations. Tang Ning walked over slowly. When Zhang Biao saw him, the manic look on his face disappeared, replaced by fear. He was tied to a chair and shrank back subconsciously. It was not until this moment that he realized that some people were scarier than ghosts. Tang Ning moved a chair and sat across from him. She looked at the blood on his forehead and asked, "Do you remember who I am now?" I remember, Zhang Biao nodded sharply and said, "It was us who took action that day, we were the ones who robbed you into that alley." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Who ordered you?" "No one, no one." Zhang Biao's eyes were slightly distracted and he murmured, "I just want money, want money." Trying to make money, Tang Ning nodded, looked at Peng Chen and said, "Detain him for another 5 days." Zhang Biao had a look of extreme fear on his face and said loudly, Capital Master, I only know that there are 2 of them. They are from the capital city. They want your life and gave us 1,000 taels of silver. I will take the rest. I don't know, I really don't know." After Zhang Biao finished speaking, he slumped on the chair, breathing heavily, and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. Zhang Biao was dragged down by 2 government officials and put into a normal cell. In another cell, several people looked at Tang Ning and Peng Chen who were passing by, and were shocked. "What did you do to Brother Biao?" "We didn't do anything." "You are abusing punishment and taking human life lightly." "We are not afraid that gangsters will fight, but we are afraid that gangsters are educated." "We are not afraid even if they are educated, and we are even more afraid that gangsters still know the law." Tang Ning opened the cell door, and several people trembled and backed away. "They have seen what happened to Brother Biao. The ironclad man turned into a human being and a ghost. They don't know what kind of torture he has experienced in the past few days." The young man in front of him seemed kind, but he was more terrifying than any ghost. Tang Ning walked into the cell and said, "He has confessed everything, now it's your turn." One person said in a trembling voice, "Recruit, what are you recruiting?" Tang Ning walked over and suddenly bent her knee and pressed her head against his stomach. "No move, right?" He kicked him away, with an angry expression on his face, "Killing, right? Who gave your dog the courage?" "And masked. You think I can't recognize you if you're masked? Come back and stand still. Recruit or not, or I'll make you the same as Brother Biao." Several people were running around holding their heads. When they heard the words "same as Brother Biao," they were agitated and spoke immediately. We recruit. Brother Biao did this. Brother Biao is the one who killed you. Brother Gui, please spare your life." Yes, the unsolved case a year ago was also done by Brother Biao and has nothing to do with us. Are you remembering wrongly? That headless case was committed by the second boss of the Qingyu gang, and the case of hiding the corpse in the well was done by Brother Biao. Yes, this has nothing to do with us, sir. Several government officials stood outside the cell, watching helplessly as the prisoners ran away with their heads in their hands and confessed to their crimes under Tang Ning's fists and kicks. Their mouths opened involuntarily. Peng Chen couldn't help but kick a scribe who was taking notes and said, "Why are you still standing there? Write down everything they say." Tang Ning kicked another person away and said angrily, "What an unsolved case, the case of hiding a corpse in a well? What I'm asking you about is the case from half a year ago. The one you charged just now doesn't count. Let's start again." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 109. Tang Ning stretched her body a few times and cracked her knuckles. After the exercise just now, the resentment accumulated in her heart over the past few days finally dissipated a little. He walked out of the cell and saw Peng Chen and the others looking at him. "What are you still doing? I didn't hear that they just admitted to murder. They should be asking and interrogating. They don't have any eyesight." He shook his aching hand and walked out of the cell door. He had already asked all the things he wanted to know. As for the other gains, I think his father-in-law was more interested in them than he was. Half a year ago, someone came from the capital to pay for murder. Not long ago, a dead man came out of nowhere and stabbed someone in the street. These two things can be easily connected. In the past, Tang Ning was just an ordinary scholar in Sujia village. He had never left Lingzhou in his life. Apart from some grievances with the village's foreign master, it was impossible to offend someone from the capital. These big shots made them travel thousands of miles and tried to take his life several times, even sending so many dead soldiers. Coming from the capital, having the ability to train many dead soldiers, and having a grudge against the former Tang Ning, it seems that there is still a sworn blood feud. The target has been narrowed down to a very small circle. Tang Yaoyao stretched out her hand, waved it in front of his eyes, and asked, "What are you thinking about, so entranced?" Tang Ning came back to her senses, looked at her, and asked, "Are you familiar with the capital?" "I've never been to the capital, so of course I'm not familiar with it." Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and said, "But yesterday a shopkeeper of our business came back from the capital. He is responsible for most of the business in the capital. He is here. I have been in the capital for more than 10 years, so I should be very familiar with it. If you have any questions, I can ask him for you." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I won't bother you anymore. Just tell me where he is and I'll ask him myself. He's mysterious, and there must be nothing good going on." Tang Yaoyao looked at him, crossed his hands on his chest, and said, "If you don't tell me what's going on, I won't take you to find him." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Okay then, I'll write a letter to Miss Li. She should have arrived in the capital by now. It's easy to inquire about anything. If it's quick, I'll have a reply in half a month. Tang Yaoyao grabbed his wrist and stood up. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "What are you doing?" Tang Yaoyao dragged him outside and said coldly, "Shopkeeper Zhao will be leaving in 2 days. If you have anything to do, ask him immediately." Governor's Mansion. The newly appointed governor of Chu gathered all the officials in Lingzhou City together early in the morning. Generally speaking, officials who have just taken office will first establish a good relationship with their local subordinates to facilitate future management. However, this Chu governor was different. When he summoned many officials for the first time, angry voices stood outside the door and counted them. It can be heard clearly even from a distance of 10 feet. It's been an unsolved case for a year and it's still unresolved. What are you waiting for? How can you make the people trust you if you act like a parent? Hiding a corpse in a well, such a heinous act, such a serious case, has been delayed for nearly a year. What kind of extremely vicious people can do such a heartbreaking thing? Every day the case is delayed, the criminal may commit another crime again. By your inaction, you are aiding the evil. I will make it clear here first. Now that I have taken office, I will not allow such things to happen again in Lingzhou. As the parents of Lingzhou, you must ask for orders for the people and do things for the people. Keep your spirits up. The governor of Chu was spitting what he said above, and the local officials in Lingzhou were frightened when they heard it below. While trembling with fear, he looked at Yong'an County Magistrate Zhou Mingli and Jian County Magistrate Zhao Zhija with faint sympathy. Jian County and Yong'an County are both Lingzhou prefectures, so the public security is naturally much better than that of these suburban counties. When it comes to unsolved mysteries, which of their counties does not have more unsolved cases than Yong County and Yong'an County? The governor of Chu singled out these two counties, and the meaning couldn't be more obvious. This is the governor of Chu using them to establish prestige. The persimmons should be picked soft, and the harder the persimmons used to establish prestige are naturally the better. Yong'an County and Jian County are both within the prefecture, right under the eyes of the governor. The official rank of the two county magistrates is half a level higher than that of ordinary county magistrates, making them the best candidates to establish authority. The Chu governor's admonishment lasted for less than half an hour, and everyone came out of the governor's mansion one after another. Several officials simultaneously bowed their hands to Zhou Mingli and Zhao Zhija and said, "Thank you for your hard work, sir." Zhou Mingli and Zhao Zhija looked at each other and left. In a store of the Tang family, Tang Yaoyao led Tang Ning in, pointed at a middle-aged man inside and said, "This is the shopkeeper Zhao. If you have anything to say, you can ask him." Shopkeeper Zhao immediately saluted her, "Miss." His name is Tang Ning. He has something to ask shopkeeper Zhao. Tang Yaoyao waved her hand and walked out, closing the door behind her. Shopkeeper Zhao looked at him and said with a smile, "Master Tang, please tell me if you have anything to say." Tang Ning stretched out her hand to signal him to wait a moment, walked slowly to the door, and opened the door suddenly. An unexpected figure jumped into his arms. Tang Yaoyao hugged him subconsciously, then quickly pushed him away, straightened her body, and said expressionlessly, "I am, just." Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Have you not thought of a reason yet?" Tang Yaoyao wrinkled her nose, "Who wants to make it up?" "Come in." Tang Ning pulled her in and closed the door. Tang Yaoyao curled her lips and walked inside. As she walked, she said disdainfully, "I'm not interested in your affairs." At this time, it was best to let her be alone for a while. Tang Ning walked up to shopkeeper Zhao and asked, "I have a few questions for shopkeeper Zhao, the capital." Shopkeeper Zhao heard what he said and said in surprise, "Tang family." Tang Ning nodded. Shopkeeper Zhao thought for a while and asked, "There are several Tang families in the capital. I wonder which one young Master Tang is asking about." Tang Ning smiled and said, Let's talk about it one by one. Shopkeeper Zhao nodded and said, when it comes to the Tang family, the most prominent one is of course the Tang family where concubine Tang Hui belongs to. The head of the Tang family, Tang Hui, was the Minister of Rights at the time and had a high position. His second brother Tang Qi was the Minister of Dongta at the time. Shiren is also the pillar of the imperial court. The third brother Tang Jing is the most respected Shiren of Zhongshu. As for concubine Tang Hui, she is one of the most favored concubines in the world today, the biological mother of His Royal Highness Prince Duan, and Prince Kong. As the three adult princes left in the capital by His Majesty, King Hui is very likely to take the position of Crown Prince in the future. Shopkeeper Zhao kept talking for a long time, and couldn't help but say, since the queen passed away and the prince died of illness, the most favored concubine in the palace is concubine Hui. Prince Duan's literary talent and military virtue are also more than those of the others. Between the two princes, the Tang family is now at its peak, and can be called the largest family in the capital, and no one can compare with them. Tang Ning nodded and asked, are there any other Tang families? Shopkeeper Zhao thought for a while and said, a member of the household department seems to have a surname of Tang. He is the largest cloth merchant in the capital. His employer also seems to have a surname of Tang. Shopkeeper Zhao thought about it for a while before saying, that's all I know. Tang Ning bowed her hands to him and said, thank you, Shopkeeper Zhao. Shopkeeper Zhao smiled, waved his hand and said, it's a small effort, sir. You don't need to thank me. When he walked out of the shop, Tang Yaoyao looked at him and said in surprise, why are you asking the capital's Tang family? Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, do you think it's possible that the Tang family in the capital lost a child 17 years ago? Tang Yaoyao thought for a moment and asked, are you not trying to say that that child is you and that the Tang family is now waiting for you to return and inherit a century-old legacy? It's not impossible. Dream. Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and said, it's still broad daylight. After being reprimanded by the new Chu governor for half a morning, Zhou Mingli was filled with boredom. When he walked back to the county office, Peng Chen walked out and handed him a piece of paper. Zhou Mingli looked at him and asked, what is this? Peng Chen said, this is the confession of the gangsters captured a few days ago. When I interrogated them, I got some unexpected results. Zhou Mingli glanced casually and was about to walk in when he paused and looked back. He stared at the confession for a long time, opened his mouth slightly, and murmured, what a coincidence. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 110. Zhou Mingli stood there for a long time, and Peng Chen couldn't help but said, sir. Zhou Mingli came back to his senses, thought for a moment, looked at him and said, have someone go to Jian County Government Office and tell Magistrate Zhao that if he wants to solve the case of hiding corpses in wells, he will give him his best tea leaves in exchange. Seeing Magistrate Zhou walking into the back office humming a tune with his hands behind his back, Peng Chen shook his head, waved to a police officer and said, Xiao Lu, come here. After Tang Ning came out of the Tang family's shop, she didn't go back to Zhou Mansion first. Instead, she went to Xiao Ru's shop. Xiao Ru and Zhou Yi were both there, so there was nothing wrong with him going back. Tang Yaoyao took a bottle of old yogurt from her third uncle's shop. It was a palm-sized porcelain bottle. It had just been taken out of the well. It was smooth, tender, and extremely cold. Although it is not the hot weather now, the old yogurt sold in the shop is still selling well. When the weather gets hotter next summer, it will surely become even more popular. Tang Ning originally made this for Fang Xiaopang. This kind of yogurt is good for the gastrointestinal tract and helps digestion, which is perfect for her to lose weight. Tang Yaoyao likes to eat this kind of old yogurt. She plans to open a yogurt shop and become the proprietress herself. She also wants to buy the secret recipe from Tang Ning. The family does not talk about the two families. Tang Ning is just fulfilling the promise she made to Fang Xiaopang. The promise was given to her casually without any thought of using it to make a fortune. When Tang Ning walked out, Lu Lao'er walked out of the alley, and Tang Ning noticed another bruise on his face. Tang Ning pointed at his face and asked, "How did you do this?" In the past, the beggars in Lingzhou city were loose and could be bullied by anyone. Now they have formed a team. Lu Lao'er, the elder of the Nine Bags Protector, would actually get slapped in the face. A street in the west of the city is the territory of the Qingyu gang, Lu Lao'er said, a little depressed. There are many of them, and they are all very powerful, so they have suffered some losses. The name Qingyu gang sounded familiar to Tang Ning. She quickly remembered something, looked at him and asked, "Are you familiar with the Qingyu gang?" Lu Lao'er shook his head and said, "I'm not familiar with it, but there are brothers in the gang who are familiar with it." Tang Ning looked at him and said, "Find a few brothers who are familiar with the terrain there and go to the county government office to find Mr. Peng." Lu Lao'er asked in surprise, "Why?" Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "The Qingyu gang is going to become the salted fish gang. When the time comes, we will recruit more brothers and take over their territory. It is said that the new governor is very serious. On the first day he came to Lingzhou, he made up his mind to pay close attention to the construction of public security. Evil forces like the Qingyu gang who are responsible for murder cases will probably be gone before tomorrow. As a serious gang that fights against the strong and helps the weak, the beggar gang should cooperate with the government to fight against evil forces, contribute its own meager strength to the construction of a harmonious Lingzhou." After Lu Lao'er was stunned for a moment, he nodded with surprise and said, "Yes, gang leader, I will make arrangements right away. I am also a beggar, why don't you let me join the beggar gang? Your hands and feet are unclean. Our beggar gang does not accept people with unclean hands and feet." There were sounds of quarreling at the entrance of the alley. Tang Ning turned around and saw that the beggar who had exchanged the stolen silver into buns and gave them to the beggar mother and daughter was arguing with one of Lu Lao'er's men. He and Lu Lao'er walked over. The beggar under Lu Lao'er saw them and said quickly, "I've seen the gang leader, elder." The beggar looked at him and said in surprise, "Are you the leader of the beggar gang?" His expression looked extremely surprised, as if he had not expected that the mysterious leader of the beggar clan would be such a neatly dressed and handsome young man. Tang Ning looked at the beggar and asked, "Why do you want to join the beggar gang? One arrow is easy to break, but 10 arrows are difficult to break. With the strength of 10,000 men, the world is invincible. The reason beggars are bullied is because they are not united." The beggar looked at him and said, "As long as all the beggars are united and have one heart, tongue can defeat and overcome any powerful enemy or any difficult environment. This is the meaning of the existence of the beggar clan, isn't it?" These words were not something that any beggar could say. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Have you read a book?" The beggar nodded and said, "I have read a few." "If you have read a little bit, you have read a lot. The beggar clan does not lack beggars, but it lacks beggars who have read books, and even more beggars who understand philosophy. Such people are the high-end talents that the beggar clan currently lacks." The beggar who was arguing with him just now shook his head and said, "If you steal things after reading a book, then our beggar gang will not be able to accept you." The beggar looked at Tang Ning and said with sincerity, "I didn't have a choice before, but now I want to be a good person." Tang Ning thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "What's your name?" "Ren Pingsheng." Tang Ning nodded and said, "From now on, you are a member of the beggar clan. You just join the gang, there is nothing you can do to honor the gang leader." Ren Pingsheng lowered his head, took out a purse from his arms and handed it to him, saying, "A small gift is not a sign of respect." Tang Ning touched her waist, then looked at the purse in his hand. After being stunned for a moment, she smiled and said, "He is a talent." A figure came over from the corner and asked, "What are the benefits of joining the beggar clan?" Lu Lao'er looked at the old beggar and said, "Disciples of the beggar clan, help each other. If one party is in trouble, all parties will support you. After joining the beggar clan, if you encounter any difficulties, everyone will help you solve them together. The old beggar thought for a moment, looked at him, and said, I have a stubborn disease that requires me to drink a pot of wine every day to cure it. If I join the beggar gang, will you buy me wine? Lu Laoer looked at him with a smile on his face and said, Get out. Tang Ning noticed that the old beggar had a new injury on his forehead. According to Lu Laoer, it was Kui Yuanwei, the man in the west of the city, who had died a few days ago. The old beggar went to sit on the table. When someone found him and took him out, he rolled his eyes. His whole body trembled for a while. He had to say that he was Kui Yuanwei's father who came back to earth to see these unscrupulous descendants. He also asked them to place a large jar of wine in front of his grave at the beginning of every month. Otherwise, he would often go home and see. As a result, someone almost broke his leg that day, and he is still walking with a limp. Tang Ning once thought that he was an old liar, and then she thought that he was an outsider who played games with the world. Now, he himself is a little confused. However, those tattered secret books he sold to him were actually real secret books. This can be seen from Tang Yaxing. Tang Ning has recently discovered that her moves over the wall have become more and more smooth. As for those dual cultivation techniques, no one has practiced them with him, and the effects are not yet known. When he returned, Peng Chen, led by two beggars, had already led a large group of detectives and was ready to go out. Pay debts with money, kill with life. Chen Guo's laws don't have so many twists and turns. There is a life case on Zhang Baiao's hands, and his head will definitely not be saved. From now on, the life of the second leader of the Qingyu gang has officially entered a countdown. Once he is investigated, it turns out that the case is true, and this is the last winter of their lives. The father-in-law was obviously very happy that the long-standing case was solved. During dinner, he recounted the details of the case again and recalled the difficulties of investigating the case, and then was kicked off the dinner table by his mother-in-law. Not everyone can listen to him talk about the details of the unsolved case with relish while eating. Governor's Mansion. An official looked at Chu Governor and said with a smile, the more capable these local officials are, the more disobedient they are. I have established authority with them this time, so I am not afraid that they will be disobedient in the future. Governor Chu nodded and said, I knew this before I came here. Mr. Zhong is quite capable. Even if this case cannot be solved, we cannot force him too much. As soon as he finished speaking, a government official walked in quickly from outside and said loudly, Sir, there is an urgent report from the Yong'an County Government Office. As soon as the Yamen officer finished speaking, another figure walked in from outside, cupping his fists and saying, Sir, Nei'an County Yamen is reporting an emergency. Governor Chu had just said this morning that he would ask the two county magistrates to report the progress of the case to him at any time. He took the two pieces of paper and looked at them, then stood up from his chair with a look of disbelief on his face. So fast. His expression changed, and the first thought that flashed through his mind was disbelief. But after he read the report in detail, he no longer had any doubts. The witnesses, physical evidence, and confessions were complete, and the two backlogged cases that he had just ordered re-investigation in the morning were actually solved. He put down the two memorials, his expression changed for a long time, and finally he just sighed. No matter what, these two backlogged cases were quickly solved on the same day. Even if he wanted to continue to establish his authority, it would be hard to use the topic to show off. But what puzzled him was that since these two cases were so simple, what had the magistrates of Yong'an and Nei'an counties been doing?